Hello everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of the Dieting Dietitian. Today I have with us Dr. Jason Mitchell. Now, one thing that's super popular right now, which I'm sure you all have heard about, is CBD. I don't like using that term because there's so much more to it than just CBD, but I want you to go into that. So we talked about probiotics.
There's a unique correlation between all of what's going on with hemp and probiotics, believe it or not. And the correlation is that it's about balance and about homeostasis. And so what's really interesting about that is that I look at it and go, man, the correlations are quite amazing, and that it's completely obvious, or should be at least, that nutritionally and medically, the most important thing for the body is to be in a state of balance or homeostasis. And that these extreme situations that occur through life are what lead us down the wrong road. And so there's nothing wrong with using the term CBD. CBD is a very exciting thing. People are really excited about those three little letters. But I'd liken to compare it to when people found out about vitamin C. You know, I mean, well, Hippocrates, and I love to make mention of this, is that Hippocrates said it best thousands of years ago. Christ before him actually is that let food be thy medicine. And I think that it's never a truer statement in medicine since then. Is that what he didn't say, though, and I love joking about this, was let a singular isolated compound identified in a laboratory, double-blind, placebo-controlled for some he didn't say that. What he said was that let food itself be medicine. And why I compare it to the ideas of vitamin C is that I compare this to like an idea of boomerang research. We eventually get back to where we started, but we start in this place of Irish sailors didn't get scurvy. Why didn't they get scurvy? They ate a lime. Researchers say, what's in a lime? They identify that vitamin C is in a lime, and because it's a very abundant compound, but not really in high quantity, by the way. It's in a very low quantity. But yet, they take the vitamin C, test it, and it has an effect against scurvy, so they say, this is what it did. But then decades later, they say, hey, there's this other compound structure in there called bioflavonoids. And then years later, they say there's these flavonoids, and then there's cofactors. And then today, smart researchers will tell you should probably just eat the lime. Because what that illustrates is that it's not about the vitamin C that you can isolate. It's about the vitamin C in concert with all of these other nutrients. Now you might be asking, why am I telling you this when it comes to cannabinoids? Because right now we're so hyper-focused on CBD because it is one of the more abundant compounds in hemp. When you look at what's in hemp or other botanicals, mind you, there's so many others. It's not just hemp, but hemp is like this ultimate superfood. And when you look at the content, that yes, CBD is an abundant one, but it's not the only one. See, there are other cannabinoids. In fact, these classifications of nutrients are called phytoplant cannabinoids, which are these nutrients that live in there. And CBD is the one that everybody's talking about today, but most people don't know that there's roughly close to 100 or more cannabinoids that we've identified thus far. Cannabinoids like CBC and CBG and CBDV, CBDA. You know, there's just so many other cannabinoids. And the reason why I mention this is that, you know, to think that CBD is the only reason or the only nutrient that is needed to support this system that has been newly identified inside the body, then if that were the case, then why wouldn't there be a CBD plant instead of just a hemp plant? Because see, the hemp contains all these other natural components. And what a lot of people automatically assume, or researchers tend to lean towards, is that this abundant one must be the most important. I could argue that it needs to be more to do anything, right? Whereas these other seemingly insignificant quantification of cannabinoids have such a dramatic impact on the body. Well, the statement that Hippocrates made was that let food be thy medicine, and why that's so crucial is because we should be looking at food for all of what it contains. My doctoral dissertation was on whole food nutrition and looking at the wholeness of food, as opposed to these singular compounds that we tend to identify, like lycopene in a tomato, as if that's the only thing that's important there. But the reality is that CBD, as important as it is not the most important. There are other cannabinoids. And so what has become very popular is the use of a phrase, full or broad spectrum. Now I will tell you, because there's no legal designation to these words, people use it pretty freely. And I believe that they have all kinds of different definitions as to what they feel that word means. But if I can for a second, I'd love to share with you what full spectrum should mean. When it comes to this area of discussion, full spectrum should mean much more than just CBD. It should mean much more than CBD plus maybe one or two other cannabinoids. It should actually mean that we contain CBD plus several other cannabinoids, at least 2 or 3, maybe 4 more, and some of the more popular are CBG, CBC, CBDV, and CBN. You should have other cannabinoids present. But in addition to that, you should also have what is naturally occurring in this plant too, in the seed, something called omegas, 3, 6, and 9. Everybody knows omega-3 pretty well, but what's interesting about omega-3s is there's actually research to show that if you're deficient in omega-3s, that this system inside the body called the endocannabinoid system doesn't even work as efficiently as it could. So omega-3s play a huge role in the success of this, and what's interesting is this plant naturally has it as a part of it, but see, people aren't paying attention to that. That should be considered. Then there's another set of compounds that are more complex and arguably more powerful than CBD or any cannabinoid will ever be. It's a classification of nutrients called terpenes. Now, terpenes are these aromatic properties, right? These aromatic things, like when you smell a rose, it smells pretty. Yeah. Well, in certain plants, terpenes can be attractors to pollinators. So bugs that like to pollinate, bees, butterflies, moths, and so on, certain terpenes will attract them. Certain terpenes are used to repel pests so that they don't eat them. These terpenes are very powerful and produced by the plants for specific reasons, but what's interesting is they have medicinal impact on the body. One in particular is beta-caryophyllene. Beta-caryophyllene is probably my most favorite. It's actually what inspired almost everything that I've done with hemp fusion and why I put it together the way that I did. Beta-caryophyllene is commonly found in clove and black pepper and other spices, but it is also found very abundantly as a terpene in cannabis, sativa L, or hemp. But this terpene has been researched for its ability to be involved in healthy inflammatory response, gastroprotective in the digestive environment, as well as even being involved in immunosupport. So what's really interesting is this terpene is so incredibly powerful, and if you really want to truly be a full spectrum product, it can't just be CBD. It has to be CBD and other cannabinoids. It has to be the omegas 3, 6, and 9, and it has to absolutely have terpenes, especially beta-caryophyllene.
And that's the way that it's found in nature, correct?
Absolutely. These things all exist in nature in these plants, and there's a term that we use a lot in this industry called the entourage effect. But the fact of the matter is it's just the dance of the botanicals. There's so many different compounds. When you look at herbal companies out there, there's whole herbs, and then there are standardized herbs. Standardized herbs are herbs that you take the whole herb and say, there's a compound I want to identify in a large quantity. I want to really focus in on that one. So your extraction process is totally and completely focused into sequestering that one active compound more dominantly than anything else. It is almost a measure of isolation. So where you're isolating this compound. There's even research that came out of a Hebrew Institute of Medicine in 2014, I believe, where they showed that if you take CBD that is either standardized or isolated at a high level, that it'll actually work and then stop. It's called, you experience what is called a bell-shaped curve dose response. Well, what they also showed was that if you use the naturally contained version of the full spectrum of compounds and all these active constituents, that not only does it not stop working, but that it continues to work and is even potentially more beneficial for a greater number of reasons. So full spectrum must be more than just CBD.
So I'm glad you touched on the bell-shaped curve and the entourage effect. Now, let's go back a second, if you don't mind, and what is the basics? What are the difference between hemp and marijuana? Because a lot of people go, oh, you know, I have a phytocannabinoid blend for you to try. It has CBD in it. Oh, will that get me high? I'm like, no, it will not. But
well, listen, to keep it really simple, there's a lot of other differences, but the main difference is the content of THC. The THC, the delta-9 THC, is the active constituent that gets you high. It has that psychoactive effect. Now, just to be political for a second, there's no reason to sequester or limit the exposure of this product to people. I'm not a firm believer in recreational use, but the medicinal impact of THC is quite valuable. But right now our government is a little bound up in its ability to let loose of cannabis in general. So THC is kind of off the menu when it comes to readily available products, except for in those states that recognize it. But really, the difference between hemp and marijuana is the content of THC. Now, if you want to get down to some of the farming elements, marijuana grows a little bushier with a lot more flowers, where hemp grows more like bamboo. And, there's all kinds of different things. But it is both plants. I mean, they're the same plant. It's Cannabis sativa L. They're just different strains of the plant. Or different species, right? Not the same species, just a different strain. Like you can have different cultivars. and they're grown for different specific purposes. But CBD products, if made correctly and are legally made correctly, meaning they're following the rules to a T, and they're being made by a manufacturer that is manufactured in an NSF GMP facility, ISO 9000 certified facility, that they have the right regulatory compliant backbone in their company, that they're operating under GMPs and doing things correctly, the likelihood of experiencing a high from their product is nil, because they're operating under guidelines that are very stringent. A lot of people believe that dietary supplements are not regulated by the FDA, but they're heavily regulated. In fact, there's something called 21 CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, is what CFR stands for, but it also, there's a part called Part 111, and that's about GMP standards and about all the manufacturing requirements, testings and procedures and distribution and tracking for human safety. So it's really, you know, there's a lot of regulations. And so if you're buying from a reputable company, Medican, the parent company of Hemp Fusion, which is I'm the co-founder and president of, we operate under all the required guidelines, and we follow strictly all the rules and regulations that are required under FDA and also the federal government nationally.
So if we can go into the processing. Everyone has a different way of doing it. Some people do different ways. What is your method without giving away too many secrets?
Sure. No problem. Hemp Fusion, the name is hemp fused together with other botanicals. That's where the name comes from, because to suggest that hemp is the only reason why CBD exists is not true. You know, supporting this endocannabinoid system in our body comes from many botanicals. Things like terpenes exist in all flowers. In fact, lavender contains a terpene called linalool, and it's known to relax you. Well, guess what? It's interacting with the endocannabinoid system to elicit that relaxing effect, and so it's really kind of cool. So there's many plants that participate in this arena, but so hemp fused together with other botanicals. Now, our process is simply this. We use CO2 extraction, but we do not actually have the steps of isolation or standardization. We take our plants and extract them through a multi-stage process of CO2 extraction to concentrate up all the native oils to the plant in cultivars that we use. All of our plants are grown in Poland, and they are all grown in very advanced eco-farming practices that are specifically under organic standards, EU organic. So we don't use the chemical pesticides. There's no irradiation. There's all kinds of really important steps to make sure that this plant is clean and wholesome and is not going to have residual toxins. CO2 extraction is without the use of solvents. So you're not going to have any of these residual toxins. It's a very clean oil. And one of the things that's most important is that when you have DNA verified cultivars, you always know that when you extract the oil that you are going to get almost the same profile every time. That way you can be assured that, one, you're never going to be in violation of the law, and the THC is not going to be present in enough level to ever get you high. In fact, the required levels are less than 0.3%. Our crude oil that is used in our products has been consistently testing at less than 0.2%, but in all honesty, our finished products in every single test we've had are actually coming out at 0.019 or less. So we're not even close to what would be the upper limit of allowable. We're way below.
Perfect. Now, you just mentioned the endocannabinoid system.
Yes.
Can you go over what that is?
Yeah, you know what? I think we're still discovering a lot about what that is, but in 1992, there were researchers right here in the United States that identified that there is this system of receptors that are located throughout the entire body, and that these receptors are kind of like locks. And these locks, when unlocked, elicit some sort of action in the body. And you know what's really cool? I try to compare this in a way that we can just visualize what's going on. This endocannabinoid system is what's called transiently active and self-regulating. Now what does that mean? So you have a thermostat in your house. You set it at 72 degrees. 72 degrees is the temperature you wish to keep in your house. That means if it gets colder than 72, the heat will kick on. But it doesn't stay on all the time. Once it gets to 72, it shuts off. Well, if it gets too hot, the air conditioner will come on and lower the temperature. When it gets to the temperature desired, it'll turn off. So that means that inside your body, this system's responsibility is to keep you in balance. And so when we eat wrong, we have stressful events that take place in our lives, all kinds of different things that happen, just living life. Our body constantly is out of balance in different ways, and this system aims as a central control panel to kind of restore that level of homeostasis or balance. Now that's even more important reason to refer back to the fact that it can't just be CBD, because CBD is only one compound. There's all these different compounds that work.
And there are different type of receptors.
That's right. That's what. That's important, because the primary two receptors that we're talking about today are CB1 and CB2. CB1 receptors are the ones that are currently acknowledged as being present in the central nervous system, the brain, the spine, and so on. And their primary jobs are things like cognition and involuntary motor function, like heartbeat, breathing, things of that nature. You have memories, appetite, all kinds of different things. And then your CB2 receptor is on the peripheral. And so you're going to find those in the organs and digestive system and other places. And their primary responsibilities are going to be immunological and healthy inflammatory response. And so these two receptor systems are designed to kick on and off, be engaged or activated or turned off to help kind of restore areas that are related to their responsibility. See, your body produces its own cannabinoids. That was a huge finding. And they're called endocannabinoids. Endo means endogenous or produced inside the body. And so endocannabinoids are super important because our body produces them. But sometimes we're just out of balance. We're nutritionally deficient, like I said about omega-3s. If you're deficient in omega-3s, it's quite possible that your endocannabinoid system isn't functioning. You know, modern researchers even identify that there is a such thing as called endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome, to where there is this deficient ability for your body to produce what's necessary. And here's where hemp comes into play.
The phytocannabinoids.
Right. Phyto means plant-derived. You know, I compare it to things like wild yam that contain phytoestrogens. So when people were looking for surrogates for what their body wasn't making on their own to supplement or nourish a system that might be falling a little short, this is where phytocannabinoids come into play, because these are surrogates. But see, phytocannabinoids aren't the only compounds. Those are where the terpenes come in too. See, phytocannabinoids and terpenes are really closely related, and arguably at any given day you could probably call them about the same thing. But you've got sesquiterpenes, you've got all kinds of different terpenes, and these cannabinoids and terpenes work together almost like brother and sister. You know, and they interact with the different receptors throughout the body. And what's super cool about them is that when you nourish this system, you know, I love to compare this, right? Whenever they talk about supporting the endocannabinoid system, there are terminology where they say you need to nourish the endocannabinoid system. Well, much like vitamin C doesn't nourish the body, the orange does. You shouldn't expect CBD to nourish the endocannabinoid system. Although it plays a part, you should expect the hemp and all these other botanicals in their full-bodied, whole food way to nourish the endocannabinoid system.
Now, are some of the phytocannabinoids have more an affinity toward one receptor or the other?
Absolutely. Certain cannabinoids will have an affinity to one because that's where they like to engage. Like for example, beta-caryophyllene pretty much likes, that terpene likes CB2 receptor. And so that's why it's involved more in immune and inflammatory response and so on. Whereas let's say THC likes CB1 receptor because it's the one that chills you out or what have you. You know what's interesting is CBD doesn't deal with either one of them. It works as a, what I like to say, a party promoter by promoting the body's production of its own endocannabinoids for CB2, or a protector or a bodyguard.
Or a bouncer.
A bouncer, yeah, a bouncer at a party or something. A bodyguard for endocannabinoids produced by the body that stimulate that activate CB1, kind of like one called anandamide. In Sanskrit, that word means bliss. And so it's the bliss molecule. So your body produces it, interacts with CB1, chills you out. Well, in order to not stay in a state of chill all the time, your body will produce an enzyme to destroy it, so it kind of gets you back into balance, so you're back to normal. Well, if your body's out of normal in the other direction, and it's killing off this anandamide and you never get any chill, CBD can inhibit that enzyme and allow anandamide to do its job. So it's kind of cool. So there's all these different jobs that these cannabinoids do. That's why CBD is important, but it's not the most important. And it's not the only one, but unfortunately what's on the market today is mostly just CBD. Even though companies want to claim that they're not just CBD, they are. They're predominantly almost entirely CBD. And when you hear somebody say, oh, I have a 50% standardized CBD, full spectrum.
That's impossible, right?
But it's fundamentally impossible. And if you ask anybody that's, you know, in the trade of herbs and things of that nature, a lot of really wise people in that area, they'll also tell you that, well, where you might have some other compounds there, they're not nearly going to be as significant in content as they would if it were just a more naturally occurring level.
So so when you do like the basic extraction, you have like a certain percentage of CBD, and that smaller amount is important because then you have more of the other terpenes, the other...
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Because we don't really sequester ourselves to what we want to find as if we know better than nature. We allow nature to speak for what the blueprint should be. And so we actually play much more closely to what the blueprint of nature is going to do. Now, granted, we have some influence on our end formulation, but we try to stick as closely to that blueprint as possible.
So similar to a B vitamin, there's a B complex that really is the best thing to help, supplement the body.
But then there's clear research that says if you take an individual B vitamin, that you should make sure that your B vitamin status and all your other B vitamins is met, because this one could even potentially throw off the other balance. Now, I don't want to suggest that's the case here because we don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
But I can certainly tell you that using a broad spectrum that's real broad spectrum is going to be far more effective. And mind you, you won't have to take as much either.
Yeah.
Because it will work.
So that again goes back to that entourage effect, which is when you have them all together the way, nature or God made it, your body has a better effect, and you don't get that resistance to just an isolate, like if it was a CBD.
Right. I mean, it's not that an isolate doesn't work for certain things, but at a certain point, the body says, I'm blind to you. I don't need any more of your message. I need other things.
Yes.
So.
Okay. Dr. Mitchell, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure, man.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you for watching. We really, really appreciate it. And join me for my next episode when I'll be talking to other experts in very specialized areas. And again, thank you, Dr. Mitchell.
My pleasure.